Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The high-backed leather chair felt like a throne of judgment as Lila sat before Marcus's massive mahogany desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office framed the city skyline, bathing the room in the golden glow of sunset, but there was nothing warm about the atmosphere between them. "Let me be clear, Miss Hart," Marcus said, his deep voice resonating through the room with calculated precision. "Your father is facing charges that would not only strip him of his judgeship, but would likely send him to prison for the next 15 years. Lila's hands tightened into fists on her lap, hidden beneath the edge of his imposing desk. At 32, she'd spent her entire life admiring her father's dedication to justice. Judge Edward Hart was a pillar of the community, a man whose integrity had never been questioned until now. "These accusations are false," she insisted, raising her chin defiantly. "My father has never taken a bribe in his life." Marcus's piercing dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. At 38, he'd built Sterling Hospitality Group into an empire with luxury hotels spanning 5 continents. His reputation for ruthlessness was as well known as his devastatingly handsome face, which currently revealed nothing of his thoughts. "The evidence suggests otherwise," he replied coolly, sliding a folder across the desk. "Bank transfers, offshore accounts, properties purchased through shell companies. The prosecution has built quite a case." Lila's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Document after document revealed a damning trail she couldn't explain. Her heart hammered against her ribs as panic threatened to overwhelm her. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What does my father's case have to do with you?" Marcus rose from his chair, his tall frame imposing as he moved to the window. The dying sunlight cast his sharp profile in gold, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the subtle curve of his lips. For a moment he was silent, and Lila found herself studying him. Despite her distress, the broad shoulders beneath his perfectly tailored suit, the powerful presence that commanded attention without effort. "I have connections," he finally said. "People who can ensure these charges disappear, evidence that can be misplaced, witnesses who might suddenly reconsider their testimonies." Hope flared briefly in Lila's chest before suspicion doused it. "And what would you want in return, money?" "My father doesn't have. I don't want money, Miss Hart." Marcus turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I want you." The words hung in the air between them. Lila blinked, certain she had misheard him. "Excuse me," Marcus approached, slowly circling the desk until he stood directly before her chair. This close, she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne sandalwood, and something uniquely masculine that made her senses heighten involuntarily. "I want you to marry me." Lila shot to her feet, the sudden movement bringing her within inches of his chest. "That's insane. I don't even know you. And yet I know everything about you," he countered smoothly. "Harvard Law graduated with honors, turned down positions at top firms to work as a public defender, stubborn, principled, fiercely loyal to your father, perhaps to a fault." His knowledge of her life felt invasive, yet she couldn't back away. Something in his presence held her rooted to the spot, a magnetic force she couldn't explain. "Why would someone like you want to marry someone like me?" she demanded, frustration and confusion warring in her voice. "If this is some kind of sick game, it's business." Marcus interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous velvet tone that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "I need a wife for 1 year. A certain business acquisition requires me to project stability, family values. You need your father's freedom. It's a simple exchange." Lila shook her head in disbelief. "There's nothing simple about selling myself to save my father." Something flashed in Marcus's eyes, a brief glimpse of emotion breaking through his controlled facade. "You wouldn't be selling yourself. You would be entering a mutually beneficial arrangement. A marriage in name. Only if that's what you prefer." The implication in his final words hung between them, charged with something Lila refused to acknowledge. She turned away, moving to the window to gather her thoughts. The city lights had begun to flicker on as darkness fell, mirroring the desperate sparks of hope she couldn't quite extinguish. "And after this year," she asked quietly, "what happens then?" She sensed rather than heard him approach, his presence suddenly warm behind her, not touching but close enough that every nerve in her body became acutely aware of him. "An amicable divorce. You'll walk away with a generous settlement. Your father remains free. I get what I need. Everyone wins." Lila turned to face him, finding herself trapped between his body and the window. His dark eyes held hers, and for the first time she saw something beyond cold calculation, a hunger that echoed the unwelcome heat unfurling in her own body. "And if I refuse," she whispered, "then I can't help your father." The regret in his voice sounded almost genuine. "The trial begins in 2 weeks. The evidence is substantial. You've seen it yourself." Lila's mind raced through alternatives, finding none. Her father's savings wouldn't begin to cover the legal fees for a proper defense, let alone fight the political forces clearly aligned against him. "Why me?" she asked, the question barely audible. "There must be countless women who would willingly marry you." Marcus's hand came up slowly, hesitating a moment, before his fingers gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture sent electricity through her skin. "Because you're nothing like them," he murmured. "You're authentic, unwavering, real." His touch lingered at her cheek, and Lila found herself unable to pull away. Instead, her treacherous body swayed slightly toward him, drawn by something primal she couldn't name. "I need an answer, Lila," he said, using her first name for the first time. The word on his lips sounded intimate, possessive. She began, then stopped, as his thumb traced the outline of her lower lip, the touch so light she might have imagined it. "Yes," she breathed, the word escaping before she could reconsider. "Yes, I'll marry you, but only for 1 year and only to save my father." Victory flashed in Marcus's eyes, along with something darker that made her heart race. He stepped back, releasing her from the magnetic pull of his presence, and extended his hand formally. "Then we have a deal." Lila reached out, intending a brief businesslike handshake to seal their arrangement. But the moment their skin touched, a current surged between them, hot, electric, undeniable. His fingers tightened around hers and their eyes locked in mutual shock at the intensity of the connection. In that single touch, Lila felt the dangerous truth: this marriage might be arranged for convenience, but there was nothing convenient about the chemistry threatening to consume them both. As Marcus reluctantly released her hand, the lingering warmth of his touch branded her skin like a promise or a warning. Chapter 2. Wedding Night Surrender. 2 weeks. That was all it had taken to transform Lila's life completely. 2 weeks since she'd agreed to Marcus's outrageous proposal. 2 weeks of whirlwind preparations for a wedding that felt more like a business merger than a union of hearts. And now, as she stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, Lila barely recognized herself in the elegant ivory gown that hugged her curves before cascading to the floor in a waterfall of silk and lace. Her dark curls were swept into an intricate updo adorned with tiny pearl pins that caught the light whenever she moved. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her father said from the doorway, his voice thick with emotion. Lila turned to face him, her heart constricting at the sight of his gaunt face and graying hair. Just 2 days after her agreement with Marcus, the charges against Judge Edward Hart had mysteriously disappeared. Her father had been reinstated to the bench with a formal apology, but the ordeal had taken its toll. "Dad," she whispered, taking his hands in hers, "you don't have to put on a brave face for me. I know what you must think of this arrangement." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "What I think is that no father should ever have his daughter sacrifice herself for his mistakes." "You didn't make any mistakes," Lila insisted. "Those charges were fabricated and we both know it." Perhaps he conceded, though doubt lingered in his expression. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're marrying a man you barely know, because of me." Lila squeezed his hands reassuringly. "I'm marrying Marcus because it's my choice. 1 year of my life is a small price to pay for your freedom." She didn't tell him about the strange pull she felt toward Marcus, the inexplicable chemistry that had sparked between them in his office. She didn't mention how her body had betrayed her every time they'd met to discuss wedding arrangements, how her pulse quickened whenever he entered a room. Those reactions were nothing but physical, meaningless biological responses she would control. "It's time," the wedding planner announced, poking her head through the doorway. Lila took a deep breath and slipped her arm through her father's. "Let's go make a deal," she whispered, with forced lightness. The ceremony was an intimate affair by Marcus's standards, only 80 guests in the grand ballroom of his flagship hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over arrangements of white roses and sterling silver candelabras. A string quartet played softly as Lila began her walk down the aisle on her father's arm, and there at the altar stood Marcus, his imposing figure even more striking, in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His dark eyes locked onto hers from across the room, his expression impossible to read. Yet something in his gaze made her steps falter momentarily, an intensity that seemed to reach across the space between them and wrap around her like physical touch. With each step closer, Lila's heartbeat accelerated. This was business. She reminded herself, a contract, nothing more. Yet her treacherous body responded to his presence with a warmth that spread from her core outward, making her skin hypersensitive beneath the delicate fabric of her gown. When she finally reached him, her father placed her hand in Marcus's. The contact sent an electric current up her arm, and she saw Marcus's slight intake of breath, the only indication that he felt it too. The ceremony progressed with careful precision vows exchanged in measured tones, platinum rings slipped onto fingers with practiced movements. Each step had been choreographed in their business-like preparations except for one crucial moment. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, his smile oblivious to the tension suddenly radiating between them. They hadn't discussed this part. In their meticulous planning, the wedding kiss had somehow been overlooked, a significant oversight now glaringly obvious. Lila tensed, acutely aware of the expectant silence descending over the gathered witnesses. Marcus's eyes questioned hers briefly before his hand came up to cradle her cheek. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Lila found herself held captive by his gaze, unable to move, as his lips met hers in what was meant to be a chaste ceremonial kiss. The moment their lips touched, something ignited between them. What should have been a brief contact lingered, deepened. Marcus's hand at her cheek trembled almost imperceptibly, and Lila's lips parted on an involuntary sigh. For an endless second, the world around them disappeared, leaving only the shocking heat of connection between two strangers who suddenly didn't feel like strangers at all. Marcus broke the kiss first, pulling back with darkened eyes that mirrored her own confusion. Applause erupted around them, bringing Lila crashing back to reality. She forced a smile, her lips still tingling from his touch, as he took her hand to lead her back down the aisle. The reception was a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and taste. Champagne flowed freely, gourmet food was served on fine china, and Marcus's business associates offered toast after toast to the happy couple. Through it all, Lila maintained her role as the blushing bride, smiling and accepting congratulations, while Marcus kept her close with a hand at the small of her back. Every point of contact between them seemed to burn through the fabric of her dress. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured against her ear during a quiet moment, his breath warm against her skin. "They're completely convinced. I did attend several theater productions in college," she replied lightly, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "I'm glad my acting skills haven't failed me." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, a brief flash of emotion she couldn't identify before his composed mask returned. "It's getting late. We should consider making our exit." The reality of what awaited them hit Lila with sudden force. The wedding night. They would be returning to Marcus's penthouse now, their shared home as husband and wife. They had discussed the sleeping arrangements, clinically separate bedrooms, separate lives under one roof. But after that kiss, the boundaries between them felt dangerously blurred. An hour later, after farewells and well wishes, Marcus's private elevator carried them to the penthouse level of his residential building. Silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken tension. Lila stared at their distorted reflections in the polished elevator doors, noting how perfectly they complemented each other visually. His tall, powerful frame beside her, more delicate one, a matched pair designed for appearance rather than substance. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, a vast space of marble and glass with breathtaking views of the city skyline. Marcus stepped aside to let her enter first, then followed, loosening his bow tie with one hand. "Your room is down the hall to the right," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I had your things moved in yesterday. Everything should be arranged to your liking." Lila nodded, suddenly awkward in her elaborate gown. "Thank you. I think I'll—" A deafening crack of thunder interrupted her, making her jump slightly as lightning illuminated the wall of windows. The city lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged into darkness, leaving them in near-complete blackness. "Perfect timing," Marcus muttered. She heard him moving in the darkness, followed by the strike of a match. Warm light bloomed as he lit a candle on a side table. The backup generator should kick in momentarily for essential systems, but the main power might be out for some time. In the soft glow of candlelight, his features seemed softer, less controlled. Lila found herself unable to look away as he lit several more candles placed throughout the room, the flickering light dancing across his profile. "Let me help you find your way to your room," he offered, retrieving one of the larger candles. "These storms can be quite severe at this elevation." Another flash of lightning illuminated his face, revealing an expression that made Lila's breath catch, a hunger quickly masked but unmistakable. She suddenly felt vulnerable in her wedding dress, its intricate back fastening impossible to manage alone. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the rain now pounding against the windows. "I can't get out of this dress by myself." The silence that followed was weighted with tension. Marcus set the candle down slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can call for assistance if you prefer." At midnight, during a blackout, Lila gave a small, nervous laugh. "I think we're on our own." She turned, gathering her hair over one shoulder to expose the long row of tiny pearl buttons running down her spine. The rustle of fabric told her Marcus was approaching, and then she felt his presence directly behind her, radiating heat in the darkness. "Tell me if I hurt you," he murmured, his fingers finding the first button at the nape of her neck. Lila closed her eyes as his knuckles brushed against her skin, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. Each button he unfastened exposed another inch of her bare back to the cool air and his burning gaze. She could feel his breathing change, becoming deeper, more measured, as if he were fighting for control. The storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled continuously overhead. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing between them, electric, unpredictable, dangerous. When the last button came free, Marcus's hands settled briefly on her shoulders, his touch feather-light yet scorching. There, he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt rather than heard. Lila turned slowly to face him, holding the bodice of her gown in place with one hand. In the candlelight, his eyes had darkened to midnight, fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Thank you," she whispered. Neither moved. The space between them seemed charged with invisible currents, pulling them toward each other against all reason. A particularly violent crack of thunder shook the building, and Lila startled forward involuntarily. Marcus caught her, his hand steady at her waist. The contact was like touching a live wire, sudden, shocking, impossible to break. Lila looked up to find his face inches from hers, his expression a battle of desire and restraint. "This wasn't part of our arrangement," he said roughly, even as his hands tightened at her waist. "No." Lila agreed, her own hands having somehow found their way to his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her fingertips. "It wasn't." Another flash of lightning illuminated them in stark relief. Two strangers bound by contract, now standing on the precipice of something neither had anticipated. When Marcus's lips finally descended to hers, it felt inevitable, like gravity claiming what had been suspended for too long. This kiss bore no resemblance to their ceremonial one earlier. This was hunger, unleashed, primal, and consuming. Marcus's arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him as Lila's hands slid up to thread through his hair. Her gown slipped precariously, caught between their bodies. As the kiss deepened, became an exploration, a claiming. Marcus groaned against her mouth, his control visibly fracturing. "We should stop." But his hands contradicted his words, one sliding up her bare back, while the other pressed her closer. Lila's response was to kiss him again, surrendering to the current that had been drawing them together since that first handshake in his office. One night she whispered against his lips, "Just tonight." Tomorrow they could return to their business arrangement. Tomorrow they could pretend this was nothing more than physical release, a wedding night tradition fulfilled without meaning. But tonight, as Marcus lifted her into his arms and carried her through the darkness toward his bedroom, Lila allowed herself to forget everything but the feel of his hands on her skin and the promise of passion in his eyes. Outside, the storm raged on, mirroring the tempest that had been unleashed between them, wild, uncontrollable, and utterly transformative. Chapter 3. Beautiful conflict. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across rumpled sheets. Lila blinked awake, slowly disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, until memories of the previous night flooded back. The storm, the darkness, Marcus's hands on her body, his lips against her skin, the overwhelming passion that had consumed them both. She turned her head cautiously to find the other side of the massive bed empty, the sheets cool to her touch. Relief mingled with an unexpected disappointment as she sat up, clutching the silken sheet to her chest. What had she been thinking? One night of weakness had complicated an already precarious arrangement. The bedroom door opened soundlessly, and Marcus appeared with two steaming mugs. He was dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar and rolled up at the sleeves, casual by his standards, yet still devastatingly handsome. His dark eyes assessed her carefully, his expression guarded. "I thought you might want coffee," he said, his deep voice neutral as he approached the bed. Lila accepted the offered mug, grateful for something to occupy her hands. "Thank you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. She sipped the coffee, prepared exactly how she preferred it, with just a hint of cream, and wondered what that detail revealed about Marcus's attention to her preferences. About last night, she began, determined to address the elephant in the room. It was unexpected. Marcus interrupted smoothly, perching on the edge of the bed at a careful distance from her. "But not unwelcome, I hope." Lila met his gaze directly. It was intense. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's one word for it. Heat bloomed in her cheeks at the memories. His tone evoked her nails, scoring his back, his name on her lips like a prayer, the way they'd moved together, as if they'd been lovers for years rather than strangers thrown together by circumstance. "It can't happen again," she said firmly, though her body betrayed her with a shiver when his eyes darkened at her words. "Can't it?" Marcus's voice dropped to that dangerous velvet tone that seemed to resonate directly with her pulse. I seem to recall you being quite enthusiastic about our arrangement last night. Lila set her coffee aside with a sharp click against the bedside table. Last night was a mistake. We agreed to a marriage in name, only professional clinical, didn't we? Marcus challenged, setting his own mug down and shifting closer. I believe my exact words were, a marriage in name, only if that's what you prefer. If, quote, you didn't seem to prefer that last night. Don't twist my words. Lila snapped, gathering the sheet more tightly around herself as she rose from the bed. Last night was incredible. Marcus finished standing as well. Even barefoot Lila had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact with his towering frame. It was incredible, and you know it. It was physical, she countered, taking a step backward. Nothing more than chemistry and circumstance. Something flashed in Marcus's eyes, a brief glimpse of emotion quickly masked. Of course, merely biology. His cool agreement should have reassured her. Instead, it stung in a way Lila refused to examine. She glanced around for something to wear, suddenly acutely aware of her nakedness beneath the sheet. Your things are still in your room, Marcus said correctly, interpreting her search. He crossed to a closet and withdrew a black silk robe. This should suffice, until you reach your quarters. Lila hesitated before accepting the offered garment, careful to avoid contact with his fingers during the exchange. She turned away to slip it on, letting the sheet drop only when the robe was securely belted around her waist. The silk felt sinfully soft against her skin, carrying the faint scent of his cologne. I've had breakfast prepared. Marcus continued, his tone businesslike, as if they were discussing a meeting agenda. We should discuss how to proceed with our arrangement, given this development. Lila turned to face him, chin raised defiantly. Nothing has changed. One night doesn't alter our agreement. 1 year separate lives under one roof, then we part ways. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. As you wish, Mrs. Sterling. The formal address struck her like a physical blow, reminding her of their legal bond and the reality of their situation. She was Mrs. Sterling, now, at least on paper. The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. I'll join you for breakfast shortly, she said, moving toward the door. I need to shower first. Marcus's eyes darkened perceptibly. Of course, take your time. Lila fled to her designated suite, her pulse racing with unwelcome awareness. Once safely behind closed doors, she leaned against the wall, closing her eyes as sensory memories assaulted her. Marcus's mouth trailing fire down her throat, his hands gripping her hips, the weight of his body pressing her into the mattress. Get yourself together, she muttered, pushing away from the wall and heading for the shower. She needed to wash away the evidence of their night together, to regain control over her treacherous body and its inappropriate responses to a man who was essentially her jailer, regardless of how exquisite the cage might be. An hour later, dressed in a simple sundress, and with her damp hair pulled back in a loose knot, Lila made her way to the dining room. The space was as impressive as the rest of the penthouse, all clean lines and modern elegance, with another spectacular view of the city through wall-length windows. Marcus stood at those windows, his back to her, as he spoke quietly into his phone. Sunlight outlined his powerful silhouette, highlighting the breadth of his shoulders and the confident set of his stance. He ended the call as she entered, turning to acknowledge her with a slight nod. You look rested, he commented, as he pulled out a chair for her at the table, already set with an array of breakfast offerings. Fresh fruit pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways. Thank you, she replied stiffly, taking the seat without meeting his gaze. Marcus took the chair opposite their new positions, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance she was attempting to enforce. He served himself from the offerings before speaking again. I've taken the liberty of having your personal items moved from your apartment. The lease has been terminated, as we discussed. Lila's fork clattered against her plate. You had my things moved without consulting me. It was part of our agreement, Marcus reminded her evenly. Your residence would be here for the duration of our arrangement. Yes, but I expected to oversee the packing of my belongings. She countered, irritation building. There are personal items, important documents, all handled with the utmost care. Marcus interrupted smoothly. I assigned my most trusted assistant to supervise. Nothing has been damaged or misplaced. Lila pushed her plate away, appetite gone. That's not the point, Marcus. You made decisions about my life without involving me. A muscle ticked in his jaw, the only sign of his own frustration. I was being efficient. You were being controlling. She shot back. Is this how our year together is going to be? You making unilateral decisions while I'm expected to smile and comply. Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Our agreement stipulates that you will live as my wife, which includes residing in my home and attending social functions as required. Beyond that, you're free to live as you choose. Am I? Lila challenged, rising from her chair. because so far it seems like every aspect of my life is subject to your approval." Marcus stood as well, his height once again imposing as he faced her across the table. "You agreed to these terms, Lila. Your father's freedom in exchange for 1 year of your life. If the arrangement no longer appeals to you, don't you dare threaten my father again." Lila snapped, moving around the table to confront him directly. "That's always your weapon, isn't it? Power, control, manipulation." Marcus's eyes flashed dangerously. "I haven't threatened anyone. I'm merely reminding you of the terms you accepted." "Terms," Lila repeated with a bitter laugh, as if this were just another business contract for you. "Is that all I am? A transaction?" Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a crack in his composed facade that revealed a glimpse of raw emotion. "You know that's not true." "Do I?" she pressed, stepping closer. "Then what am I to you, Marcus? A convenience, a necessity, a body to warm your bed when the mood strikes." His control snapped visibly, his hand suddenly gripping her upper arms as he pulled her closer. "Is that what you think last night was convenient?" The heat of his touch burned through the thin fabric of her dress, sending unwelcome shivers across her skin. What else could it be? She whispering, her voice betraying her with a slight tremor. "It was inevitable." Marcus growled, his face inches from hers. "From the moment you walked into my office, I've been fighting this obsession. Every time you challenge me, every time you refuse to bend to my will, it only makes me want you more." Lila's breath caught at the raw confession. "That's not what he demanded." His grip tightening slightly. "Not mutual. Not what you want to hear. Not convenient for your narrative of me as the heartless villain in this scenario. Not fair." She finished, her voice barely audible. Marcus's eyes searched hers, seeking something she wasn't sure she wanted him to find. "None of this is fair, Lila. Not my desire for you, not your father's situation, not this arrangement that brought us together." The truth of his words resonated through her, breaking down defenses she'd carefully constructed. Without conscious decision, her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palm. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted softly. "How to be near you without what Marcus prompted, one hand releasing her arm to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. The gentleness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the tension vibrating between them. "Without wanting you," Lila confessed, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. "And I hate that. I hate that my body betrays me every time you're near." Marcus's intake of breath was sharp, his eyes darkening to midnight. "Is that what this is, betrayal? What else would you call it?" She met his gaze defiantly. "I'm supposed to despise you. You've essentially blackmailed me into marriage. You control every aspect of my life, and yet—" She didn't finish her sentence. Didn't need to. The electricity crackling between them spoke volumes about the "and yet" that complicated their arrangement beyond recognition. Perhaps Marcus said, his voice dropping to that dangerous velvet register that made her knees weak. "We should stop pretending." Pretending what Lila asked, though she already knew the answer. Pretending that this isn't part of our arrangement now. His hand slid from her face to the nape of her neck, fingers threading through her hair. "Pretending we don't both want this." The last word hung between them, loaded with meaning and possibility. Lila knew she should pull away, reinforce the boundaries she'd declared earlier. Instead, she found herself swaying toward him, drawn by the same inexorable force that had brought them together the previous night. "This doesn't change anything," she whispered, even as her body contradicted her words, pressing closer to his. "It's still just physical, just biology." Marcus's lips curved in a knowing smile that sent heat spiraling through her core. "Then let's not overthink it." His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that matched her own, the kiss instantly deepening into something that transcended mere physical attraction. Lila's hands clutched at his shoulders as he lifted her effortlessly, setting her on the edge of the dining table. Their breakfast dishes scattered some crashing to the floor, unheeded, as Marcus stepped between her parted knees, his hands sliding up her thighs beneath her dress. "Say you want this," he demanded against her throat, his voice rough with need. "Say you want me." Lila gasped as his teeth grazed the sensitive spot below her ear. "I want this," she admitted, her nails digging into his back through his shirt. "God help me, I want you." The confession broke the last thread of restraint between them. Their coupling was frantic, desperate clothing pushed aside rather than removed. The dining table became their unlikely altar of passion. Every touch was a battle, every kiss a surrender, as they lost themselves in the storm they created together. Afterward, as they clung to each other, both breathing heavily and stunned by the intensity of their connection, Lila knew that despite her protestations, something fundamental had shifted between them. This wasn't just physical anymore. It wasn't just biology or chemistry or circumstance. It was dangerous, and neither of them knew how to stop it. Chapter 4. Silent Confessions. 3 weeks into their marriage, a dangerous pattern had emerged between them. During daylight hours, they maintained the pretense of their arranged lives. Lila immersed herself in cases at the public defender's office, while Marcus commanded his business empire from his corporate throne. But as twilight descended, everything changed. Their carefully maintained distance collapsed in the privacy of the penthouse, where unspoken tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. Some nights ended with them in separate rooms, wounds of their arrangement freshly reopened. Others concluded with tangled sheets and shared breath, neither willing to acknowledge what was happening between them beyond physical release. They never discussed what happened between them in darkness, never acknowledged the growing frequency of nights spent in Marcus's bed rather than separate rooms. It was easier to pretend their arrangement remained uncomplicated by emotions. Neither was prepared to name until the call came. Lila was reviewing case files in the penthouse study when her phone rang, her sister's number flashing on the screen. "Nora," she answered instantly, alert to the panic in her younger sister's voice. "Lila, it's Dad." Nora sobbed through the line. "He collapsed during court proceedings. They've taken him to Metropolitan General. The doctors are saying heart attack." Lila was already on her feet, files scattering unheeded across the floor. "I'm on my way. Have you called anyone else?" "Just you," Nora hiccuped through tears. "Please hurry." The call ended, and Lila stood frozen for a moment, terror washing through her in paralyzing waves. Her father had always been invincible in her eyes, the strong, principled center of their family, since her mother's death when Lila was just 12. The thought of losing him, her hands trembled as she gathered her purse and keys, her mind racing with fragmented prayers and worst-case scenarios. She was halfway to the elevator when she remembered she'd dismissed the driver earlier, having planned to stay in for the evening. Her car was at the secure parking facility 3 blocks away. Cursing under her breath, Lila jabbed the elevator button repeatedly, as if that might summon it faster. When the doors finally opened, she nearly collided with Marcus, stepping out, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he registered her distress. "Lila, what's happened?" She tried to step around him. "I need to get to Metropolitan General. My father is hurt." Marcus filled in his hand, catching her elbow to steady her. "What happened?" "Heart attack," Lila managed, fighting back tears. "I need to go now." Without hesitation, Marcus guided her back into the elevator, pressing the button for the parking level. "My car is here. He'll drive you." Relief flooded through her momentarily, overriding her independent instincts. "Thank you." The ride down was silent, Lila's mind filled with terrifying possibilities, while Marcus maintained a steadying hand at the small of her back. His Aston Martin waited in its reserved space, and he opened the passenger door for her before sliding behind the wheel. As they pulled into evening traffic, Lila realized she'd never seen Marcus drive before. He always had a chauffeur for business and social engagements. Yet he handled the powerful car with the same confident precision he applied to everything else, weaving through traffic with focused efficiency. "He's going to be all right," Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving the road. "Your father is strong." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. She stared out the window at the blurring city lights, aware of Marcus occasionally glancing her way, gauging her emotional state with uncharacteristic attentiveness. When they reached the hospital, Marcus pulled directly to the emergency entrance, ignoring the no parking signs. He came around to open her door, then surprised her by taking her hand in his coat. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Lila was too distracted to protest the unexpected support. They moved through the emergency department together, Marcus's commanding presence parting the crowds as he guided her to the information desk. Before she could speak, he stepped forward. "Judge Edward Hart," he stated calmly, "brought in with cardiac symptoms approximately 40 minutes ago. We need his status and location immediately." The attendant's eyes widened slightly at Marcus's authoritative tone. She typed rapidly on her keyboard, then looked up. "He's been taken to the cardiac unit on the 4th floor. The elevator is—" "Thank you, Marcus." Cut her off already, steering Lila toward the elevators. In the cardiac unit they found Nora pacing the waiting area, her face tear-streaked and pale. At 25, Lila's sister had always been the sensitive one in the family, wearing her emotions openly, where Lila had learned to contain hers. She rushed to Lila's arms, then froze at the sight of Marcus behind her. "You brought him," Nora whispered, pulling back with obvious confusion. "He drove me." Lila explained, simply not wanting to analyze Marcus's presence herself. "Have the doctors said anything more?" Nora wiped her eyes, glancing warily at Marcus. "They're running tests. They said it was definitely a heart attack, but they won't know how severe until they get the results." A doctor appeared then, clipboard in hand. "Family of Edward Hart." "Yes." Lila stepped forward quickly, Nora at her side. She was acutely aware of Marcus remaining a respectful distance behind them, silent but watchful. "I'm Dr. Sharma," the woman introduced herself. "Your father has suffered a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. The good news is that it appears to be moderate rather than severe. We've stabilized him and are preparing him for an angiogram to determine whether there are any blockages requiring intervention." "Can we see him?" Lila asked, relief making her knees weak. Briefly, Dr. Sharma nodded. "He's sedated but conscious. One visitor at a time." "Please go," Nora urged Lila. "You're the one he'll want to see first." Lila squeezed her sister's hand gratefully, then followed the doctor down the corridor to a treatment room. The sight of her father, her strong, invincible father, hooked to monitors and oxygen, made her throat constrict painfully. His complexion was ashen. His breathing labored despite the supplemental oxygen. "Daddy," she whispered, moving to his bedside and taking his hand. Judge Hart's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with effort. "Lila," he murmured, his voice weak. "Didn't mean to scare you." "Shh," she soothed, fighting back tears. "Don't try to talk. Just focus on getting better." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Marcus with you?" Lila blinked in surprise. "Yes, he drove me here. How did you know?" A ghost of a smile touched her father's pale lips. "Saw you together. The way he looks at you, Dad." "Save your strength," Lila interrupted, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. "Nora's here too. She'll want to see you." He nodded slightly, his eyes already drifting closed again. "Good man," he murmured clearly. Referring to Marcus, "watches over you." Lila pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead as he slipped back into sleep, her emotions a tangled mess. She returned to the waiting area to find Nora and Marcus engaged in quiet conversation, an unexpected sight that halted her steps momentarily. "He's resting," she announced, drawing their attention. "The doctor says we should prepare for him to be here at least overnight, possibly longer depending on the test results." Nora nodded, rising from her seat. "I'll go see him now." As her sister disappeared down the hallway, Lila found herself alone with Marcus. He stood by the window, his powerful silhouette outlined against the night sky beyond, looking strangely out of place in the sterile hospital environment, yet somehow exactly where she needed him to be. "Thank you," she said quietly, moving to stand beside him. "For driving me, for staying." Marcus turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically open. "You don't need to thank me, Lila. He's your father." The simple statement held layers of meaning she wasn't ready to examine. Instead, she asked, "Did you have important meetings tonight? I know you mentioned a dinner with investors." "Nothing that couldn't be rescheduled." Marcus dismissed the question with a slight shrug. "Your father's health is more important." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. This wasn't the calculating businessman who had propositioned her in his office. This was someone else, someone who drove too fast to get her to the hospital, who commanded information from hospital staff, who waited patiently while she tended to her family. Still, she persisted, needing to understand. "You barely know my father." Marcus's dark eyes held hers steadily. "But I know you, Lila." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with implications neither was prepared to voice. Before Lila could respond, a nurse approached with a clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Sterling, we need some information about your father's medical history and insurance." The title Mrs. Sterling still startled Lila each time she heard it. She accepted the clipboard with a nod, moving to sit in the waiting area to complete the forms. Marcus took the seat beside her, his thigh brushing against hers as he settled. "Is there anything I can do?" Lila shook her head, focusing on the paperwork, to avoid the confusing emotions his proximity evoked. "This shouldn't take long. Then we wait for the test results." "We'll wait as long as necessary," Marcus replied, the "we" sending an inexplicable warmth through her, despite the circumstances. Hours passed in the sterile waiting room. Nora eventually curled up across 3 chairs, using Marcus's suit jacket as a makeshift pillow. Lila sat beside Marcus, alternating between anxious pacing and exhausted silence. Throughout the night, Marcus remained a steady, silent support, ordering coffee when she was fading, summoning the head of cardiology, who apparently owed him a favor for additional consultation, and most surprisingly simply being present without expecting anything in return. Around 3:00 in the morning, Dr. Sharma returned with cautiously optimistic news. The angiogram had revealed minor blockages that could be treated with medication rather than surgery. Judge Hart would remain hospitalized for several days of observation, but his prognosis was good with proper care and lifestyle changes. Relief made Lila lightheaded. She sagged against Marcus, who instinctively wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steadying her. "Thank God," she whispered, tears finally breaking free after hours of rigid control. Marcus's arm tightened around her, his thumb tracing soothing circles against her shoulder. "He's going to be all right," he murmured, his lips close to her temple. You heard the doctor. Lila nodded, too emotionally drained to resist the comfort he offered. They remained that way until Nora stirred, blinking sleepily at the sight of her sister wrapped in Marcus's protective embrace. Good news, Nora asked, hopefully sitting up. Lila wiped her eyes, reluctantly pulling away from Marcus's warmth to update her sister. As they discussed arrangements for the coming days, Marcus chances to make several phone calls. When he returned, his expression was resolved. I've arranged for the hospital's top cardiologist to oversee your father's case, he informed them. Doctor, Carter is flying in from Chicago tomorrow afternoon, and I've contacted your father's chambers to ensure all his cases are redistributed appropriately. Lila stared at him in astonishment. Marcus, that's how did you? My connections occasionally have practical applications, he said with a slight shrug, as if summoning renowned specialists and rearranging judicial schedules were minor favors. Thank you, Nora said sincerely, her initial wariness toward Marcus visibly melting. Really? Marcus acknowledged her gratitude with a brief nod before turning to Lila. You should rest, both of you. I've arranged a private room down the hall where you can sleep for a few hours. I don't want to leave him, Lila protested. The nurses have my number, Marcus assured her. They'll call immediately if there's any change. When she still hesitated, he added more softly. You need strength to support him through recovery, Lila. A few hours' rest will help. His logic was irrefutable. Reluctantly, Lila allowed him to lead her and Nora to a small but comfortable room that had mysteriously become available despite the hospital's usual overcrowding. 2 recliners had been arranged with pillows and blankets, and a tray of sandwiches and fruit waited on a side table. How did you manage this? Lila asked. Too tired to be anything but grateful. Marcus's smile was enigmatic. The hospital board includes several of my business associates. Of course it did. The man's network of influence seemed limitless. Lila was too exhausted to question the ethics of such arrangements, especially when they benefited her father. Will you stay? She asked impulsively, as Nora disappeared into the attached bathroom. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, surprised perhaps that she would want him to. I have an early meeting I should prepare for, he said regretfully. But I'll return this evening. My driver will remain at your disposal in the meantime. Lila nodded, disappointed despite herself. Of course, you've already done so much. Marcus stepped closer, lifting his hand to brush a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. The tender gesture was so unexpected that Lila's breath caught in her throat. Call me if anything changes, he instructed softly. Anything at all. She nodded again, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Marcus hesitated, then bent to press a gentle kiss to her forehead, a gesture so unlike their usual passionate encounters that it left her stunned. Rest, he murmured against her skin before pulling away. I'll see you tonight. After he left, Lila sank into one of the recliners, her emotions in turmoil. The man who had walked out the door was not the cold, calculating businessman who had essentially blackmailed her into marriage. This Marcus, caring, supportive, gentle, was someone she hadn't known. Existed, someone who complicated their arrangement in ways far more dangerous than physical desire. When Nora emerged from the bathroom, she gave Lila a knowing look. So that's your husband? Yes. Lila confirmed, unsure what else to say. He's not what I expected, Nora admitted, settling into the other recliner. When you told us about this arrangement, I pictured some heartless tycoon using Dad's situation to force you into marriage. But the way he looks at you, what Lila prompted when her sister trailed off. Nora's smile was tired but perceptive. It doesn't look like an arrangement, Lila. It looks like he genuinely cares about you. Lila turned away, unwilling to examine the hope that flickered at her sister's observation. It's complicated. Most real relationships are, Nora pointed out before closing her eyes. Just something to think about. Long after Nora's breathing had evened into sleep, Lila remained awake, replaying the events of the night. Marcus's immediate response to her need, his quiet, unwavering support, the gentle kiss that had felt more intimate than any of their passionate encounters. It was just kindness, she told herself, basic human decency in a crisis. It didn't change the nature of their arrangement or erase the circumstances that had brought them together. Yet as she finally drifted toward sleep, Lila couldn't deny that something fundamental had shifted between them. Something neither had anticipated when they'd entered their business arrangement. Something that terrified her far more than to physical desire ever could. True to his word, Marcus returned that evening, bringing fresh clothes for both Lila and Nora, and taking charge of logistics with effortless authority. For the next 3 days, he established a pattern handling hospital administrative matters and his own business affairs during the day, then returning each evening to support Lila through the night, never complaining about uncomfortable waiting room chairs or interrupted sleep. On the 4th night, with Judge Hart stabilized and recovering well, Marcus insisted that Lila return to the penthouse for proper rest. Too exhausted to argue, she acquiesced after extracting a promise from Nora to call immediately if anything changed. The penthouse felt strangely silent after the constant bustle of the hospital. Lila stood in the entryway, suddenly uncertain in the space that was legally her home, yet still felt like Marcus's territory. "You should eat something," Marcus suggested, removing his suit jacket and loosening his tie with practiced movements. "I can have the chef prepare." "No thank you," Lila interrupted. "I'm not hungry, just tired." Marcus studied her face, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes and the strain etched around her mouth. "Then you should sleep." Lila nodded, taking a step toward her suite before hesitating. The thought of being alone with her tumultuous emotions was suddenly unbearable. Without conscious decision, she turned toward Marcus instead. "Would you?" she began, then faltered. Unsure how to voice what she needed, Marcus waited patiently, his dark eyes intent on hers. "Just hold me." Lila finally whispered, vulnerability naked in her voice. "Please." Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by something that might have been tenderness, if she'd believed him capable of such emotion. Without a word, Marcus extended his hand to her. Lila took it, allowing him to lead her to his bedroom, a space that had become familiar through nights of passion, but never comfort. They undressed in silence, the usual heated urgency absent, as Marcus handed her one of his t-shirts to sleep in. When they slipped beneath the covers, he gathered her against his chest, one arm wrapped securely around her waist, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Thank you," Lila murmured into the darkness, "for everything you've done for my father, for Nora, for me." Marcus's hand stroked gently along her spine, a soothing rhythm that began to unravel the knots of tension she'd carried for days. "You don't need to thank me, Lila." "I do," she insisted softly. "None of this was in our arrangement. You've gone far beyond our agreement." His chest rose and fell with a deep breath beneath her cheek. "Some things transcend contracts and arrangements." The simple statement hung in the darkness between them, neither willing to explore its implications further. Instead, they lay in silence, the rhythm of their breathing gradually synchronizing as exhaustion pulled Lila toward sleep. Just before consciousness slipped away completely, she felt Marcus press a gentle kiss to the crown of her head and heard him whisper words. She wasn't meant to hear words that followed her into dreams and changed everything she thought she understood about their relationship. "I would do anything for you, Lila, anything at all." In the safety of near sleep, with her defenses lowered by emotional and physical exhaustion, Lila allowed herself to acknowledge the dangerous truth she'd been fighting. Somewhere between their beginning and this moment of genuine tenderness, the line between arrangement and reality had blurred beyond recognition, and she wasn't sure she wanted it back. Chapter 5. Hart Surrender. Judge Edward Hart's recovery progressed steadily over the next 2 weeks. He'd been discharged from the hospital with strict orders for rest and medication, along with significant lifestyle changes. Against her father's protests, Lila had arranged for a live-in nurse at his home and visited daily to ensure he followed doctor's orders. Throughout it all, Marcus had been an unexpected pillar of support, rearranging his schedule to accompany Lila on hospital visits, consulting with specialists behind the scenes, even engaging Nora in conversations about law school applications. During long waiting room hours, the ruthless businessman Lila had agreed to marry seemed increasingly like a facade hiding someone far more complex. "You're hovering again." Her father complained good-naturedly as Lila adjusted his pillows for the third time that afternoon. They sat in the sunroom of his colonial home, autumn light, streaming through tall windows. "I'm making you comfortable," she corrected with a smile. "There's a difference." Judge Hart caught her hand, his grip noticeably stronger than it had been a week ago. "I'm fine, Lila. The doctor said my recovery is ahead of schedule. You should be focusing on your own life, not playing nurse to an old man." "You're hardly old," Lila protested automatically, though the silver that now dominated his once dark hair told a different story. The heart attack had aged him visibly, a reminder of his mortality that still frightened her. "Old enough to recognize when my daughter is avoiding something," he countered with the perceptiveness that had made him a formidable judge or someone. Lila stiffened slightly. "I don't know what you mean." Marcus, her father, said simply, "You've been finding excuses not to return to the penthouse all week. I've been caring for you." Lila insisted, turning away to straighten an already perfect stack of magazines. "Besides, Marcus understands. He's been completely supportive." "Yes, he has," her father agreed mildly, "which makes your avoidance all the more puzzling." Lila sighed, knowing her father would persist until she gave him something. "It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are." He patted the chair beside him. "Sit. Talk to your old father, who just had a heart attack and deserves some consideration." The guilt trip was shameless but effective. Lila sat reluctantly trying to formulate her chaotic feelings into coherent thoughts. Our arrangement has evolved. She finally admitted in ways neither of us anticipated. Her father's expression remained carefully neutral. You've developed feelings for him. It wasn't a question. Lila opened her mouth to deny it, automatically then stopped herself. What was the point of lying to a man who had spent decades discerning truth from falsehood in his courtroom? I don't know what I feel, she answered honestly. He's not who I thought he was. The man who manipulated me into marriage, and the man who sat by your hospital bed for 3 nights straight, seem like completely different people. Or perhaps they're the same man, and your perspective has changed. Her father suggested gently. Lila shook her head, unwilling to accept that simple explanation. You don't understand. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, clinical temporary. Feelings weren't part of the deal. And yet here they are, her father observed with a slight smile. Inconvenient things. Feelings. They rarely respect the boundaries we try to set for them. Before Lila could respond, the doorbell rang. The nurse appeared a moment later, announcing that Marcus had arrived. Lila's pulse quickened traitorously as she rose to greet him. Marcus entered the sunroom with his usual commanding presence, though she noticed he deliberately softened his demeanor when addressing her father. He carried a small package and a folder of papers. Judge Hart, he greeted, shaking her father's hand. You're looking much stronger today. Thanks to your excellent doctors, her father acknowledged. And please, I've told you to call me Edward. Marcus nodded, then turned to Lila with a smile that did nothing to calm her racing heart. Lila, I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, she assured him, hyper-aware of her father, watching their interaction with interest. Is everything all right? I wasn't expecting you until this evening. Everything's fine, Marcus assured her. I had meetings nearby and thought I'd stop by. He turned back to her father, extending the package. I brought those historical legal texts we discussed, first editions, as promised. Judge Hart's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm as he unwrapped 2 leather-bound volumes. The complete Blackstone commentaries. Marcus, these are museum pieces. A small token of appreciation for your insights on the Thompson case, Marcus replied smoothly. Your perspective was invaluable. Lila looked between them in confusion. You've been consulting my father on legal matters. Just casual discussions, her father clarified, though his expression suggested more. Marcus has been kind enough to indulge my need for intellectual stimulation during recovery. Your father's expertise is unparalleled, Marcus added. It would be wasteful not to benefit from it. The easy rapport between them unsettled Lila for reasons she couldn't articulate. While she'd been struggling with her conflicted feelings, these two had apparently been forming a relationship independent of her. One, based on mutual respect, rather than obligation or crisis. I should check on lunch, she said abruptly, needing a moment alone to compose herself. In the kitchen, Lila gripped the counter and drew several deep breaths. Why was she so rattled? Shouldn't she be pleased that Marcus and her father were getting along? That Marcus was showing genuine consideration for her father's well-being and interests? Unless this too was manipulation. A calculated effort to win her father's approval, and by extension lower her own defenses. The thought lodged like ice in her chest. Could she truly trust anything about Marcus? Or was she being naive, Lila? His voice behind her made her spin around, hand pressed to her heart. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, concern evident in his expression. You startled me, she accused, trying to mask her tumultuous thoughts. Marcus approached slowly, as if sensing her skittishness. Your father asked for tea. I offered to help. Lila nodded stiffly, turning to the kettle. Of course. His hand on her arm stopped her, gentle but insistent. What's wrong? Nothing, she denied automatically. Lila, just her name spoken in that way that somehow cut through her defenses. You've been avoiding me for days. If I've done something to upset you. His hair was neatly combed, his expression composed, though Lila could still detect tension around his eyes. You didn't have to do this, she said softly as they rode the elevator down. I know how important the Carter hotels are to your expansion plans. Marcus's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with casual intimacy that still sent warmth spreading through her. Business can wait. Your friend can't. The simple prioritization of her needs over his business interests, something the Marcus she'd first met would never have done, left Lila momentarily speechless. She squeezed his hand in silent gratitude as they stepped into the waiting car. Clara's restaurant, Azure, was housed in a renovated industrial space in the Arts District. By the time they arrived, the opening was in full swing, a glamorous crowd mingling beneath exposed beams and artful lighting, while servers circulated with champagne and elegant appetizers. There you are, Clara exclaimed, hurrying toward them with a relieved smile. I was starting to worry. I'm so sorry we're late." Lila apologized, embracing her friend. "Clara, this is Marcus. Marcus, this is Clara Evans, culinary genius, and my oldest friend. The restaurant is spectacular," Marcus said, shaking Clara's hand. "The conversion of this space is inspired." Clara beamed, visibly flattered by his genuine admiration. "Thank you. Though I'm focused on the food, the design was all my partner's vision." As Clara led them through the crowded space, introducing them to her staff and other guests, Lila watched Marcus with growing appreciation. Despite the business crisis he'd left unresolved, he gave Clara and her achievement his full attention, asking insightful questions about her culinary philosophy and business model. When he mentioned connecting her with the food and beverage director of his hotel group, Lila knew it wasn't empty networking, but a genuine desire to support her friend's talent. "Your husband is not what I expected," Clara murmured later when they had a moment alone near the bar. "From the way you described your arrangement, I pictured someone cold and controlling." Lila glanced across the room where Marcus was engaged in conversation with Clara's partner, gesturing animatedly as they discussed the building's restoration. "He surprised me too," she admitted. "It doesn't look like an arrangement anymore," Clara observed shrewdly. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching, that's not business, Lila." Before Lila could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A man in a cook's whites was arguing loudly with the host, his voice carrying across the previously elegant ambiance. "I deserve to be here," the man shouted, pushing past the host. "I created half these recipes. You think you can just fire me and steal my work?" "Clara Palid." "Leo," she whispered, "my former sous chef. We had to let him go last week after he showed up drunk for the third time." The intruder spotted Clara and started toward her, his expression thunderous. "You backstabbing." Lila instinctively stepped in front of her friend, but before the situation could escalate further, Marcus materialized beside them, his presence commanding, as he positioned himself protectively. Sir Marcus addressed the furious chef with deadly calm. "You're causing a scene at what should be a celebration of culinary excellence. I suggest you leave before security is called." "Who the hell are you?" Leo demanded, swaying slightly, clearly intoxicated. "Someone who can ensure you never work in a respectable kitchen again if you don't exit immediately," Marcus replied, his voice low, but carrying an unmistakable threat. "Or perhaps you'd prefer to discuss your behavior with the police." The chef hesitated, looking between Marcus's imposing figure and the security guards now approaching. With a final venomous glare at Clara, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him as conversations gradually resumed around them. Clara sagged with relief. "Thank you," she said to Marcus. "He's been making threats since we fired him, but I never thought he'd actually show up here." "I'll have someone escort him well away from the premises," Marcus assured her, already texting his driver. "And I can arrange for security for the next few weeks if you'd like." When Clara stepped away to check on her rattled staff, Lila turned to Marcus with wonder. "You were incredible." Marcus's expression softened as he looked down at her. "I merely helped diffuse an unpleasant situation." "No," Lila contradicted, reaching up to straighten his tie in a gesture that had become habitual. "You protected my friend. You took her success seriously. You put aside your own business crisis to be here. That's not what I expected when we made our arrangement." Something vulnerable flickered in Marcus's eyes. "Perhaps our arrangement has evolved into something neither of us expected." The simple acknowledgement hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had dared voice. Before Lila could respond, Clara returned, insisting they take their seats for the official dinner service. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of exquisite food, excellent wine, and celebratory toasts. Throughout it all, Marcus remained attentive and engaged his hand, often finding Lila's beneath the table, his smile directed at her with growing frequency. It was nearly midnight when they finally departed, both offering heartfelt congratulations to an emotional Clara. In the privacy of the car heading home, Lila leaned against Marcus's shoulder, a comfortable silence enveloping them. "Thank you," she said softly, as city lights slid past the windows. "Tonight meant a lot to me." Marcus's arm tightened around her shoulders. "You don't need to thank me, Lila." "I do," she insisted, turning to face him. "I know what you sacrificed to be there." "The Carter acquisition will still be there tomorrow," Marcus interrupted gently. "Some things take priority." The simple statement carried more meaning than its words alone. Lila studied his face in the shifting shadows of the car, seeing beyond the powerful businessman to the man who had grown up with nothing, who understood the value of presence and support more than most. "When did this change?" she asked quietly. "When did we change?" Marcus's smile held a trace of wonder. "I'm not sure. Somewhere between obligation and this moment, something shifted." The car pulled into the private garage beneath their building, but neither made a move to exit. Instead, Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "I need to tell you something," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Something I've realized recently." Lila's heart accelerated, both hopeful and afraid of what might follow. "What is it?" Marcus reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "This stopped being an arrangement for me weeks ago. Perhaps it never truly was not from the moment you walked into my office." His admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable, in a way that the confident, controlled Marcus rarely allowed himself to be. "What are you saying?" Lila whispered, needing to hear the words explicitly. Marcus's dark eyes held hers, his voice dropping to that intimate register that seemed reserved only for her. "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, Lila, and it terrifies me more than any business risk I've ever taken." Chapter 7. Shattered Trust. The days following Marcus's confession unfurled like a dream. The words "I'm falling in love with you" had changed everything, transforming their carefully negotiated arrangement into something authentic and precious. For the first time since their wedding, Lila allowed herself to embrace the feelings she'd been fighting, the undeniable truth that she had fallen in love with the complex, contradictory man who had begun as her captor and somehow become her heart's choice. Their passion, always intense, deepened with emotional honesty. Marcus's carefully maintained control crumbled when they were alone, revealing a tenderness and vulnerability that both surprised and moved her. They began making tentative plans that extended beyond their one-year agreement discussions of travel, shared goals, a future neither had anticipated when signing their marriage contract, which made the betrayal when it came all the more devastating. The morning began like any other. Marcus had left early for a breakfast meeting, kissing Lila awake with promises to return for their lunch date. She drifted back to sleep, only to be awakened later by her phone vibrating insistently on the nightstand. "Hello," she answered, groggily, not recognizing the number. "Lila Hart. This is Robert Grayson." Lila sat up, instantly alert. Robert Grayson was her father's colleague on the bench, a judge she'd known since childhood. "Judge Grayson, is everything all right?" "Is it my father? Your father is fine," he assured her quickly. "But I'm concerned about you. Could we meet?" "There's something you should know regarding your situation." The hesitation in his voice sent a chill through her. "What situation?" "Your marriage to Marcus Grayson," replied carefully. "I've recently come across information that suggests it may not be what you believe it to be." Lila's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of information?" "Not over the phone," the judge insisted. "Can you meet me at Riverside Park in an hour?" The bench by the old boathouse. Her instinct was to refuse to defend Marcus against whatever insinuations were coming, but something in Grayson's tone, genuine concern rather than malice, gave her pause. "I'll be there," she agreed after a moment's hesitation. An hour later, Lila spotted Judge Grayson on the designated bench, his distinguished figure hunched against the autumn chill. He stood, as she approached, his expression grave beneath salt and pepper hair. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I've debated whether to involve myself in this matter, but my conscience wouldn't allow silence." "What is this about?" Lila asked directly, anxiety tightening her chest. Judge Grayson's weathered face grew solemn. "It's about the investigation your father and I were conducting before those fabricated charges appeared. Charges that conveniently vanished once you married Marcus. Those accusations were clearly false," Lila stated, defensive heat rising in her voice. "Someone orchestrated them to destroy my father's reputation." "You're absolutely right," Grayson agreed, surprising her with his directness. "But have you ever asked yourself who possessed both motive and resources to execute such a calculated attack? Who benefited most from your father's sudden vulnerability and your subsequent marriage?" A defensive retort died on Lila's lips as the judge withdrew a folder from his briefcase, so reminiscent of the one Marcus had shown her that fateful day in his office, that her stomach clenched involuntarily. "These are financial records tracing the origin of the alleged bribes found in your father's accounts," Grayson explained, opening the folder. "It took considerable effort to follow the money trail through various shell companies and offshore accounts, but the path ultimately leads to a holding company called Horizon Ventures." The name meant nothing to Lila. "I don't understand." "Horizon Ventures is a subsidiary of Sterling Holdings," Grayson said quietly. "Marcus' parent company." The world seemed to tilt beneath Lila, the implications of his words too horrific to comprehend. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." "I wish it were," Grayson replied gently. "Your father and I have been investigating corruption in development contracts for years. 3 months before your marriage, we were getting close to exposing a bribery scheme involving city officials and certain developers. One of those developers was Sterling Hospitality Group." Lila shook her head in denial, though ice was spreading through her veins. "Marcus wouldn't." "The timing is what first raised my suspicions," Grayson continued. "Just as we were closing in on evidence that would have implicated Marcus's company, Your father was suddenly accused of the very corruption he was investigating. Then, almost immediately after your marriage to Marcus, those charges disappeared. Coincidence? Lila insisted weakly, though the pieces were aligning with terrible clarity. Grayson's expression was compassionate but unyielding. There's more. The property your family's restaurant sits on, the one Marcus supposedly saved from foreclosure, it's the keystone in a development plan that requires that entire block. Every surrounding property has been acquired over the past year by various entities that all trace back to Sterling Holdings. Lila stood abruptly, the folder slipping from her numb fingers, documents scattered across the path, each one a nail in the coffin of her trust. I need to go, she managed, her voice barely audible. Lila Grayson called as she turned away. I'm sorry, truly, but you deserve to know the truth. The truth. Such a simple word for the devastation it had wrought. Lila moved through the park in a daze, memories cascading through her mind with new terrible context. Marcus's precise knowledge of her father's case, his convenient connections that made the charges disappear, his insistence on marriage, rather than a simple business deal to acquire her family's property, even his recent interest in her father's legal opinions. Had that been manipulation too, a way to monitor how close they were getting to the truth? By the time she reached the penthouse, grief had hardened into rage. She packed quickly, throwing essentials into a suitcase with shaking hands. Every corner of what she'd begun to think of as their home now felt tainted, each memory suspect. Had any of it been real, or had Marcus been playing an elaborate game from the beginning, manipulating not just her circumstances but her heart? She was halfway to the elevator when it opened, revealing Marcus. His smile of greeting faltered as he took in her suitcase and tear-streaked face. Lila, what's happened? His concern sounded so genuine that fresh pain knifed through her. How could he sound so sincere while living such an elaborate lie? Don't, she said, her voice breaking. Just don't pretend anymore. Marcus stepped toward her, confusion evident in his expression. Pretend what? What's going on? Horizon Ventures, she said flatly, watching his face for a reaction. The slight tensing of his shoulders was answer enough, though his expression remained carefully neutral. It's a subsidiary company. Why? A subsidiary company that fabricated evidence against my father. Lila corrected, her voice rising despite her efforts to maintain control. A subsidiary company that helped you manipulate me into marriage so you could acquire my family's property for your development project. Marcus went very still, his dark eyes never leaving hers. Who told you this? Does it matter? Is it true? Lila demanded, tears threatening again. Did you target my father to force me into marriage? The seconds of silence that followed told her everything. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking visibly. It's more complicated than that, he finally said. 3 weeks ago, those words might have been enough to make her listen. Now they only fueled her sense of betrayal. It's actually very simple, she countered, her voice shaking with emotion. You destroyed my father's reputation, threatened his freedom, and blackmailed me into marriage, all for a property acquisition. Was any of it real, Marcus? Or was I just another asset to be acquired and managed? Lila, please. Marcus stepped forward, reaching for her. Yes, it began that way. I won't deny the original intent. But what's happened between us? She recoiled from his touch. Don't you dare try to justify this. I'm not justifying anything, Marcus insisted, desperation entering his voice. I'm asking you to let me explain how something that began as business became the most important relationship of my life. You expect me to believe you love me? Lila laughed bitterly. After discovering the entire foundation of our relationship was a lie. It wasn't all a lie. Marcus's voice dropped to that intimate register that had once made her heart race. Now it only intensified her pain. What I feel for you is real, Lila, more real than anything I've ever felt. She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know you. Maybe I never did. With those words, she stepped around him into the waiting elevator. Marcus made no move to physically stop her, though the anguish in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. Where are you going? He asked quietly. Home, Lila replied as the doors began to close. My real home. The last image she had of Marcus was his stricken expression as the elevator doors closed between them, a man who had finally found something money couldn't buy, only to lose it through his own machinations. In the privacy of the descending elevator, Lila finally allowed herself to break sobs tearing from her throat as she mourned not just the relationship she'd thought they were building, but the future she'd begun to envision at his side. The cruelest part wasn't the manipulation that had brought them together. It was that somewhere along the way she had genuinely fallen in love with him, and now she would never know if his feelings had been equally genuine or simply another facet of his elaborate deception. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, Lila had composed herself enough to walk steadily through the building and into the waiting taxi. She gave the driver her father's address, then leaned back against the seat, emotionally drained. Her phone began to ring Marcus's name, flashing on the screen. She declined the call, then another, then a third. When texts began appearing, she turned the phone off, completely unable to bear his explanations or excuses. The taxi wound through familiar streets toward her childhood home, each mile increasing the distance between the life she'd been building with Marcus and the certainty of her family's love. As the familiar colonial came into view with its wraparound porch and massive oak tree, Lila felt a wave of relief so intense it bordered on physical pain. This was real. This had always been real, and she would find her way back from betrayal within these walls that had witnessed every significant moment of her life, including now the shattering of her heart by the man she had never meant to love. Chapter 8. Soul's Réunion. For 5 days, Lila existed in a fog of betrayal and heartache within the sanctuary of her childhood home. Her father and sister watched her with concern as she moved like a ghost through familiar rooms, answering their questions with vague reassurances that couldn't mask her devastation. Marcus called relentlessly the first day, then sent flowers that Lila left untouched on the porch until Nora took pity and brought them inside. By the third day, the calls stopped. In their place came a hand-delivered envelope containing a single page in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. "When you're ready to hear the truth, all of it, I'll be waiting. What began as deception became the most real thing in my life. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to explain." Lila read the note a dozen times before tucking it away in her nightstand drawer, unable to discard it, yet unwilling to respond. On the 6th morning, Judge Hart found her in the garden wrapped in a blanket despite the mild autumn day. He settled beside her on the bench, his presence comforting in its familiarity. "You can't hide here forever, Lila," he said gently. "I'm not hiding," she protested weakly. "I'm regrouping." Her father's knowing smile was tinged with sadness. "You haven't mentioned his name once since you arrived. That tells me everything I need to know about how much he matters to you." Lila stared at the fading roses, their petals drifting to the ground like her discarded hopes. "He manipulated us, Dad. He fabricated the charges against you. He orchestrated this entire situation to force me to marry him, all for a property deal." "Yes," her father agreed simply, "and you need to hear his side of the story." Lila turned to him in shock. "His side, Dad? He nearly destroyed your reputation. He threatened your freedom. And yet here I am," Judge Hart said mildly, "with my reputation intact and my freedom secure. Whatever his initial motives, Marcus ensured no lasting damage was done to me or my career." "That doesn't excuse what he did," Lila insisted. "No, it doesn't," her father agreed. "But it suggests there's more to the story than Judge Grayson's investigation revealed." Lila frowned. "You knew about Grayson's investigation," Judge Hart nodded. "He came to me first. I suggested he speak to you directly. I believed you deserved to know the truth, however painful." "Then why are you defending Marcus now?" Her father was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "Because I've seen the way he looks at you, Lila. I've witnessed his transformation from the calculating businessman who first approached me about dropping the charges to the man who sat by my hospital bed, night after night. Not for show, not for manipulation, but because he genuinely cares about your happiness." Lila blinked back sudden tears. "How can you be sure? How can I ever trust anything about him again?" "That's for you to decide," her father said gently, "but you can't make that decision without hearing him out. Love, real love, can begin in imperfect circumstances. It's what you build together that matters." "I never said I loved him." Lila whispered, the words catching in her throat. Her father's smile was knowing. "You didn't have to." As they sat in companionable silence, a commotion at the front of the house drew their attention. Nora appeared around the corner of the garden, her expression a mix of concern and urgency. "Lila," she called, "you need to come inside now." Something in her sister's tone had Lila on her feet, immediately following Nora through the garden and into the house. In the living room, the television was tuned to a local news channel where Marcus's face filled the screen. He stood behind a podium, cameras flashing, as he addressed a crowd of reporters. Effective immediately, he was saying, his expression more serious than Lila had ever seen it. "The Sterling Riverside development project has been canceled. All properties acquired for the development will be offered back to their original owners at the purchase price." Lila sank slowly onto the couch, disbelief warring with confusion, as Marcus continued. "I also announce my resignation as CEO of Sterling Holdings, pending board approval of my successor. My focus moving forward will be the Sterling Foundation, which will dedicate its resources to affordable housing initiatives and small business preservation in historic neighborhoods." The reporters erupted with questions, cameras flashing frantically, as Marcus raised a hand for silence. "I have one final statement," he said, his voice steady, despite the visible strain in his expression. "To the person most hurt by my actions, I cannot undo the deception that brought us together. I can only hope that my actions moving forward prove the truth of what my words couldn't convince you to believe. What began as the worst of me became the best of us." With that cryptic message clearly meant for her alone, Marcus stepped away from the podium despite the shouted questions following him. The broadcast cut to stunned news anchors, speculating about the sudden abandonment of what would have been the city's largest development project in decades. "Did he just," Lila whispered, unable to complete the thought, "sacrifice his empire? Her father finished having followed them inside." "It appears so." Nora turned down the volume as the anchors began interviewing financial analysts about the potential impact on Sterling Holdings stock. "Lila," she said quietly, "there's more. He's outside." What Lila stood abruptly, moving to the window. Sure enough, Marcus's Aston Martin was parked at the curb, its owner leaning against it with uncharacteristic uncertainty. He wore no suit today, just jeans and a simple button-down, making him look younger and strangely vulnerable. "He's been there for almost an hour," Nora explained. "He said he won't leave until you agree to speak with him, even if it means camping on the sidewalk." Lila turned from the window, her heart racing with conflicting emotions. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be ready to forgive him," her father said gently. "Just ready to listen." The simple wisdom in those words steadied her. With a deep breath, Lila nodded. "Okay." The autumn air felt crisp against her face as she stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind her. Marcus straightened as she descended the steps, hope and trepidation warring in his expression. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said. When she reached him, his voice raspier than usual, as if he hadn't slept in days. Looking closer, Lila could see the evidence of that in the shadows beneath his eyes, and the slight dishevelment of his normally impeccable appearance. "I saw your press conference," she said, keeping her distance despite the instinctive urge to move closer. "Quite a dramatic gesture." "It wasn't a gesture," Marcus replied, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "It was a choice, the only choice that matters." "You're giving up everything you've built," Lila said, disbelief, still coloring her tone. "Your company, the development, your reputation in the business world." "Not everything," Marcus interrupted quietly. "Just the things that don't matter without you." The raw honesty in his voice threatened to crumble her resolve. "How can I believe anything you say now, Marcus? Our entire relationship was founded on manipulation." "Not our entire relationship," he countered, taking a tentative step closer. "Yes, I orchestrated the circumstances that brought us together. Yes, I wanted your family's property for my development. But from the moment you walked into my office, fierce, principled, unintimidated by my power or position, something changed." "You expect me to believe you fell in love at first sight?" Lila asked skeptically. "No," Marcus admitted. "I was attracted to you immediately, but love came later, gradually, through moments. I never planned or anticipated through watching you fight for your clients with the same passion you fought me through. Seeing your devotion to your father and sister, through experiencing your capacity for compassion, even towards someone who didn't deserve it." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize when words failed him. A rare occurrence for a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals with ease. "I wanted to tell you the truth," he continued. "A dozen times I almost did, but I was afraid not of losing the development or the property, but of losing you. The irony is that my silence cost me exactly what I feared most." Lila wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the impulse to bridge the distance between them. "When did it stop being business for you? When did I stop being a means to an end?" Marcus's expression softened with remembered revelation. "The night of the storm. Our wedding night, when I held you in my arms and realized no business deal had ever made me feel so completely alive." He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "I began falling in love with you that night, Lila, and I've been falling ever since." His confession hung in the air between them, sincerity radiating from every word. Lila wanted desperately to believe him, to accept that the connection they'd built could transcend its deceptive beginnings. "How can I ever trust you again?" she whispered the question, genuine rather than accusatory. "One day at a time," Marcus answered simply. "I don't expect your forgiveness or your trust immediately. I'm asking for a chance to earn both, to prove that the man you came to know, the man who loves you beyond reason, is the real Marcus Sterling, not the calculating businessman who made the worst mistake of his life in how he brought you into it." He reached for her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers curled around hers with gentle pressure. "I love you, Lila," he said, his composure finally breaking as the words emerged rough with emotion. "Not as a possession or an arrangement or a business advantage. I love your fierce principles that challenge me, your compassion that humbles me, your strength that inspires me. I've never needed anyone before you, and now I can't imagine existing without you." He drew a shaky breath, vulnerability naked in his eyes. "If you can find any part of your heart still open to me, I'll spend every remaining day of my life earning back your trust and proving this love is the only real thing I've ever built." Lila looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch seep through her defenses. She thought of their journey from reluctant strangers to passionate lovers to something deeper neither had anticipated. Could she walk away from the man who had shown her father such kindness during his illness? The man who had shared his painful childhood with her? The man who had just sacrificed his business empire in a public declaration of his priorities? "I need time," she said, finally looking up to meet his gaze. "Not to decide if I love you, I've stopped fighting that truth, but to reconcile the beginning of our story with what we became." Hope blazed in Marcus's eyes, tempered with respect for her boundaries. "Take all the time you need. I'll be waiting, whether it's days or weeks or months." "I'll wait for you, Lila." Something shifted between them in that moment. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. The foundation for rebuilding what had been broken. Stronger perhaps for having faced its weakest point. When Marcus lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles before releasing her, Lila felt the first fragile stirrings of trust reawakening in her heart. "We have a lot to talk about," she said, stepping back, though everything in her yearned to move closer. "We do," Marcus agreed. "When you're ready." As he turned to leave, Lila called after him, "Marcus." He paused, looking back with such naked hope that her heart constricted painfully in her chest. "Come for dinner tomorrow," she said. The invitation surprised them both. "Till Ling, we can begin talking then." The smile that illuminated his face was unlike any she'd seen before. Unguarded, genuine, transformative in its joy. It was the smile of a man who had glimpsed salvation after believing it forever beyond his reach. "I'll be here," he promised. And in those three simple words, Lila heard the vow of a lifetime. Chapter 9. Heart's Promise. Reconciliation came slowly in cautious steps and honest conversations. The dinner Lila had invited Marcus to stretched into 3 hours of raw, painful truth-telling, his complete confession of the scheme that had brought them together, her unflinching questions about every detail she needed to understand. By the end of that evening, they had established a fragile foundation for rebuilding what had been shattered. In the weeks that followed, they created a new pattern. Marcus moved into a hotel suite, rather than returning to the penthouse that held too many complicated memories. They met for lunch, for walks in the park, for quiet dinners, where they continued dismantling the walls between them. Each day, each honest conversation, each moment of vulnerability strengthened the trust that had been broken. 1 month after his press conference, Marcus picked Lila up from her father's home for a drive in the countryside. Autumn had painted the landscape in brilliant hues of amber and crimson, a backdrop for the significant conversation Lila sensed was coming. "Where are we going?" she asked as Marcus navigated winding roads away from the city. "Somewhere special," he replied, the slight tension in his jaw betraying his nervousness. "Somewhere I should have taken you long ago." Lila studied his profile, appreciating how much more open his expressions had become since their separation. The controlled mask of the businessman had given way to authentic emotions he no longer attempted to hide from her. "You're being mysterious," she observed, a smile tugging at her lips despite her curiosity. Marcus glanced at her with that private smile that still made her heart flutter. "Not mysterious, just preparing." Before she could question him further, he turned onto a gravel drive, leading to a sprawling Victorian farmhouse nestled among ancient oaks. The 2-story structure with its wraparound porch and gabled roof looked like something from a storybook, recently restored but maintaining its historical character. "What is this place?" Lila asked as Marcus parked beside a stone pathway. "Mine," he answered, simply turning to face her. "Ours, if you want it to be." Surprise rendered Lila momentarily speechless as Marcus came around to open her door. He took her hand to help her from the car, his touch sending the familiar warmth through her that had never diminished, despite everything they'd been through. "I don't understand," she said as he led her up the pathway. "When did you buy this?" 2 weeks after our wedding, Marcus admitted, opening the front door with a key from his pocket. "I saw it while reviewing properties for the development. It was outside the target area, but something about it." He hesitated, a hint of vulnerability crossing his features. "It reminded me of the home you described growing up in, but with enough space for our future. For a family someday, if that's what you wanted." The simple admission that he had been thinking of their future together, even when their marriage was still ostensibly just an arrangement, touched something deep within Lila's heart. Inside, the house opened into a spacious entrance hall with restored hardwood floors and a graceful staircase leading to the upper level. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating spaces that somehow managed to feel both grand and intimate. "It's beautiful." Lila breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the craftsmanship evident in every detail. "It needs furniture," Marcus noted, watching her reaction carefully and personal touches. "I thought perhaps you might want to make those decisions if you decide to come home." Home. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the physical structure. Lila moved through the rooms slowly, each one revealing thoughtful renovations that preserved the house's character while incorporating modern comforts. "Why didn't you tell me about this place before?" she asked when they reached a sunroom overlooking expansive gardens. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his expression pensive. At first, it was a contingency plan, a property acquisition, separate from the development purchased quietly through personal funds rather than company resources. And later, Lila prompted. Later, Marcus continued, his voice softening. It became a hope, a possibility. "I wasn't sure I deserved, but couldn't stop imagining a real home with you. Not the cold showcase of the penthouse where we were playing roles, but somewhere we could truly begin." He crossed to where she stood by the windows, maintaining a careful distance that respected the boundaries they were still navigating. "I kept it as a reminder that what began as calculation had evolved into something genuine. Something worth sacrificing everything else for." Lila searched his face, finding only sincerity in his dark eyes. Over these weeks of rebuilding, she had learned to read the subtle nuances of his expressions to distinguish truth from the protective habits of a lifetime spent guarding vulnerabilities. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" she asked directly. "I'm asking you to come home," Marcus clarified the distinction. "Important to build a life together that has nothing to do with arrangements or obligations. A fresh start, if you're willing." The hope in his voice nearly undid her composure. Lila turned back to the window, gathering her thoughts as she gazed out at the gardens that would bloom magnificently in spring. So much had changed between them. Marcus resigning from his company, redirecting his considerable talents toward the foundation he'd established, proving daily through actions rather than words that his priorities had fundamentally shifted. "What about the penthouse?" she asked, still processing the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Sold," Marcus replied simply. "The proceeds went to the foundation to fund small business grants in neighborhoods like the one where I grew up." Lila turned back to him in surprise. "You didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now," he said with a small smile. "Part of my promise to be completely transparent moving forward." The reminder of that promise the night they had begun rebuilding their relationship warmed her. Marcus had kept his word, meticulously sharing business decisions, foundation plans, even the therapy sessions he'd begun to address. The deep-seated control issues stemming from his childhood poverty and loss. "There's something else I need to tell you." Marcus continued, his expression growing serious. "Robert Grayson came to see me yesterday." Lila tensed at the mention of the judge who had revealed Marcus's deception. "What did he want?" "To inform me that his investigation has concluded," Marcus explained. "With my cooperation, he's been able to identify and build cases against the city officials who were actually accepting bribes from developers' cases. Your father was originally investigating before I interfered. The admission of wrongdoing still came with visible difficulty, but Marcus no longer avoided responsibility for his actions. It was one of many changes Lila had observed in him, this willingness to acknowledge mistakes without deflection or excuse. "Will there be charges against you?" she asked, concern evident in her voice despite their complicated history. Marcus shook his head. "I've agreed to testify against the others involved in exchange for my cooperation. And full disclosure, plus the establishment of the foundation as restitution, the DA is declining to pursue charges against me personally." Relief washed through Lila, surprising her with its intensity. Despite everything, the thought of Marcus facing legal consequences had become unbearable. That's good." She managed the inadequacy of the words obvious to them both. Marcus moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, smell the familiar sandalwood cologne that still triggered memories of nights in his arms. "Lila," he said softly, her name on his lips. Still a caress. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. The fact that you've allowed me back into your life at all is more than I deserve. But I need you to know that nothing, not the business, not the wealth, not the power I accumulated, none of it matters without you." His vulnerability was complete, unguarded, in a way the Marcus she'd first met would never have allowed. This was the man she had glimpsed, in moments of tenderness, the man who had sat by her father's hospital bed, the man who had finally emerged fully from behind the armor of success and control. "I fell in love with you against every rational judgment." Lila admitted her own walls crumbling as she spoke, even knowing how our story began. "I can't change how I feel about who we became together, who you truly are beneath everything else." Hope blazed in Marcus's eyes, tempered with caution born of hard lessons. "Does that mean "It means I'm ready to come home," Lila said, simply closing the distance between them at last. "Not to the penthouse or even to this beautiful house, but to you, to us, to whatever we build together from here." Marcus's arms wrapped around her waist with exquisite gentleness, as if she might still vanish if he held too tightly. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible. More than anything in this world." When their lips finally met after weeks apart, the kiss held all the passion that had always flared between them, but now tempered with deeper emotion, trust, rebuilding forgiveness, offered promises made not with words, but with the complete surrender of two hearts that had found their way back to each other, despite every obstacle. Later, as they walked the property's grounds hand in hand, discussing plans for gardens and perhaps a studio where Lila could pursue the painting she'd abandoned in law school, the peace between them felt both miraculous and inevitable, as if their souls had recognized something essential in each other from the beginning, even when their minds had been clouded by mistrust and manipulation. They were halfway down a stone path bordered by late-blooming roses when Marcus suddenly tensed beside her, his hand tightening around hers. "What is it?" Lila asked, alarmed by the change in his demeanor. Marcus nodded toward the circular drive where a black sedan had pulled up behind his car. "I'm not expecting anyone." A man emerged from the vehicle, tall, distinguished with silver hair, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. Even from a distance, something about him seemed vaguely familiar to Lila, though she couldn't place why. "Wait here," Marcus said, his protective instincts evident as he moved toward the visitor. Lila ignored the instruction, keeping pace beside him as they approached the stranger. As they drew closer, she noticed the man's eyes, the same deep brown as Marcus's, set in a face that bore the unmistakable stamp of familiar features aged by decades. "Hello, Marcus." The man said, his voice carrying a subtle accent. Lila couldn't place. It's been a long time. Marcus had gone completely still beside her, tension radiating from every line of his body. 26 years, he replied coldly. Not long enough. The realization struck Lila with sudden clarity. The resemblance was unmistakable now that she looked for it. "Is this my father?" Marcus confirmed, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Charles Sterling. A man I haven't seen since he walked out on my mother and me when I was 10 years old." Charles's penetrating gaze shifted to Lila, his assessment clinical and cold despite the familiar shape of eyes inherited by his son. "So you're the woman from the news reports, the catalyst for my son's unfortunate business decisions." The contempt in his tone made the temperature around them seem to drop. Lila felt Marcus's body coil with tension beside her, his protective instinct manifesting as he shifted his stance to create a barrier between her and his father. "State your purpose, and leave," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying an edge Lila hadn't heard since their earliest confrontations. 26 years of silence buys you exactly 2 minutes of my time." Charles's mouth curved into something too calculated to be called a smile. The expression familiar yet perverted the same predatory look she'd once seen on Marcus's face during business negotiations, but without any of the humanity Marcus had revealed beneath his armor. A father can't express concern when his son abandons a lifetime of strategic acquisition, for his eyes flicked dismissively toward Lila. "Sentimentality. You're dismantling everything you've built, Marcus. Everything I taught you to value. You lost the right to question my decisions when you abandoned us," Marcus stated flatly. "How did you find this place?" "I've kept tabs on you over the years," Charles admitted casually. "Your success has been impressive until recently." The implication was clear. He viewed Marcus's resignation and redirection as weakness rather than growth. Lila felt Marcus's body tense further beside her, recognized the struggle as old wounds threatened to reopen beneath his father's calculating gaze. Without hesitation, she slipped her hand into Marcus's, lacing their fingers together in silent support. The simple contact seemed to ground him, his breathing steadying as he drew strength from her presence. "My recent decisions have brought me more success than you could possibly understand," Marcus replied, his voice gaining confidence with each word. "I have everything that matters now." Charles's gaze dropped to their joined hands, his expression hardening. "I taught you better than this, boy. Sentiment is weakness in business. Women come and go, but power." "You taught me nothing," Marcus interrupted sharply. "Everything I built despite you, not because of you. And everything I've changed because I finally understood what actually matters." He turned to Lila, his eyes softening as they met hers. "Would you give us a moment? I need to speak with my father alone." This time, Lila recognized the request was not about protection, but about closure, something Marcus needed to address without an audience, even hers. She nodded, squeezing his hand once before releasing it. "I'll wait for you inside," she said, her eyes conveying everything. Words couldn't her support her love, her confidence in his strength. As she walked back toward the house, Lila heard Marcus's voice behind her, firm, resolved, uncompromising, in a way that had nothing to do with the ruthless businessman he'd once been, and everything to do with the man he'd become. "Let me make something perfectly clear," he was saying to his father. "I am not like you. I never will be. And the woman walking away right now is not a weakness. She is the reason I finally found the strength to become the man I was meant to be." Pride swelled in Lila's chest as she climbed the porch steps, turning back once to see Marcus standing tall in the autumn sunlight, finally confronting the ghost that had driven him for so long. Whatever words passed between father and son in the moments that followed, she knew with absolute certainty that Marcus would return to her, changed yet again, not broken by reopened wounds, but strengthened by final liberation from the past that had haunted him. This, she realized, was what love truly meant, not the passion that had always flared between them, though that remained undiminished, but this profound partnership that strengthened them both, that allowed truth instead of masks, vulnerability instead of control, growth instead of stagnation behind protective walls. As she waited in what would become their home, Lila felt the last lingering doubts dissolve from her heart. Their beginning may have been built on deception, but their future, the one they were choosing together with clear eyes and open hearts, would be founded on something far stronger: the truth of who they were separately and together, and the love that had transformed them both. Chapter 10. Eternal Flames. Sunset painted their private beach in amber and gold, the ocean stretching before them like molten copper. 5 years had passed since the tumultuous beginning of their journey, 5 years of passion, challenges, and love that had only deepened with time. Lila stood at the water's edge, the hem of her simple white dress dancing in the breeze. Marcus approached silently, his arms slipping around her waist to pull her against his chest. She leaned into him instinctively, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin as they watched the sun descend toward the horizon. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Marcus murmured against her hair. "How could I forget? It was the night I finally stopped fighting what we had become. That night, after months of rebuilding trust, they had fled to this remote coastline. Under the stars, Lila had finally spoken the words that had been in her heart. "I love you completely, without reservation." And it was here that Marcus had proposed again, not with an ostentatious diamond, but a simple band of intertwined gold and platinum, symbolizing their lives once separate, now permanently entwined. Now, 5 years later, they had returned to renew that promise. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, turning her gently in his arms. Lila looked up at the man who had become her world, no longer the cold businessman who had manipulated his way into her life, but a partner who had earned her trust through countless acts of honesty and unwavering support. "I've been ready since the moment I stopped fighting what my heart already knew," Lila answered, tracing the beloved contours of his face. "That you are the home I never knew I was searching for." Marcus captured her hand, pressing his lips to her palm. "5 years ago, I asked you to marry me on this beach. Today, I'm asking you to choose me again every day for the rest of our lives." He slid a slender gold band inlaid with 5 small diamonds onto her finger alongside her wedding band. "I will love you with everything I am. I will never stop earning your trust. I will cherish every moment of this life we've built together." Tears blurred Lila's vision as she placed a matching band onto his finger. "And my vow to you is to love you beyond reason and circumstance, to see you, truly see you, in your strength and vulnerability. To never forget that what began as our greatest weakness became our greatest strength." Their kiss contained all the passion that had ignited between them from the first, but deepened now by years of genuine intimacy. They sank to their knees in the sand, desire rising between them as naturally as breathing. Their lovemaking had evolved over the years from desperate passion to something deeper, to more intentional, yet no less fervent. When release claimed them, it came with perfect synchronicity, their bodies speaking ancient truths their words could never fully capture. In that suspended moment, they transcended physical sensation into something sacred, an almost spiritual union where boundaries dissolved between them. As Marcus helped her to her feet, brushing sand from her skin with tender touches, Lila realized she had one more gift to give him. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently against her abdomen. "Something that makes this moment perfect." Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes, followed by overwhelming emotion. "Lila," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Are you saying?" She nodded, tears of happiness gathering. "I found out 3 days ago. I was waiting for the perfect moment." Marcus fell to his knees before her, his arms wrapping around her waist as he pressed his face against her still flat stomach. When he looked up, his face was transformed by joy, so profound it took her breath away. "Thank you," he whispered, pressing reverent kisses to her abdomen. For this gift, for your love, for believing in us when I gave you every reason not to." Lila joined him on her knees, bringing them face to face in the moonlight. "This child will be born of the truest love I've ever known, a love that began in darkness but found its way to light." Marcus gathered her close, his strength, a sanctuary, as it had become over their years together. "From the moment you walked into my office, he murmured something in me. Recognized you as my salvation. I just didn't understand yet what that meant." And now, Lila asked, searching his eyes, "Now I understand that forcing you to marry me was both the worst mistake and the greatest blessing of my life." Marcus answered with complete honesty, "Because it brought me to this moment with you, in my arms, our child growing beneath my hand, and a future brighter than anything I could have manipulated into existence." As they held each other beneath the vast canopy of stars, the ocean's eternal rhythm providing a soundtrack to their renewed vows, Lila realized they had come full circle. From the sterile confines of Marcus's office, where he had demanded her hand in a loveless arrangement, to this wild, beautiful shore, where they chose each other freely, their souls as intertwined as their bodies had been moments earlier. Their beginning had been forced, calculated, built on manipulation and resistance. Their forever was chosen, cherished, founded on honesty and mutual surrender. A love that had claimed not just their bodies but their very souls. Eternal.